Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to the workshop. Now today we're going to be talking about Swiss Army knives, specifically this one, which is a Cyber Tool Lite. Now this is a Swiss Army knife that I've had for quite some time, and I was a little bit disappointed when I bought it because it was a lot larger in thickness than I really expected, completely my own fault. And it's now starting to look a little bit worse for wear, so I think it's about time that I gave it some tender loving care and also addressed some of the issues about how wide it is and modified it to make it more suitable for my needs. Let's get tinkering. Now the Cyber Tool Lite is a pretty comprehensive Swiss Army knife. It has a lot of tools on it. So it uses the plus scales. The scales are these plastic parts, and the plus scales come with a little screwdriver for your glasses, a toothpick, a pen, a pin, and then on the other side you get some tweezers. So they're quite nice additions that you get on any Swiss Army knife that has the plus scales. It also comes with a big bottle opener that also acts as a screwdriver, and this is supposedly a wire stripper. And you've got then the can opener, which also has a little screwdriver at the end. Both these screwdrivers are pretty redundant really, because the big thing about the Cyber Tool is that it has a hex driver. This driver takes these little hex bits and comes inside with a number of replacement bits that you can use. So you've got a total of 4 bits, double-ended, so that's 8 types of bit, plus this hex end is actually 2 different sizes so that you can use it with other hex bits. So it's a pretty nice addition, and that was one of the main reasons I bought the Cyber Tool. The reason I went for the Cyber Tool Lite specifically, and I bought it when it was available in America but not in the UK, so I had to import it, was that it had this light, and I was quite excited about having a torch on a Swiss Army knife. Now, unfortunately, what I then found out was that the batteries that this uses are a very unusual battery, and they're 10 to 15 pounds each, which is a ridiculous amount of money to spend on a little battery. But worse still, the switch on it tended to switch on. In fact, it was on there already. Tended to switch on when you put it in your pocket. So when you needed to use the torch, it just wasn't available, and it wasn't a particularly bright torch either. The other side of this layer had something that was reasonably useful, which is the magnifying glass. Now what I want to do to this pen knife is I want to change these scales. These ones are all a bit beat up. On this side it's chipped where I dropped it, so I want to replace these scales, and I want to replace them with the plus scales to hold all these pieces, but additionally I want it to also have some additional functionality in those scales. The main reason though for modifying it is to do something a little bit more radical. I want to remove the layer with the magnifying glass and the torch, because it's quite a thick layer and it will slim up the Swiss Army knife quite a bit and make it a bit more manageable when it's in your pocket. The other thing that I thought, I've got other Swiss Army knives that have a combined bottle opener and can opener all on one tool, and because I've got the bit driver I don't really need the small and large flathead screwdrivers. So I think I can do away with these two and replace them with the combined bottle stroke can opener. That leaves me with a slot, and where the combined bottle and can opener is generally used is with a long knife blade. So I'm thinking that I can remove this layer as well, replace it with a long knife blade and the combined can and bottle opener, and then I'll be able to remove this layer here, which has a small knife blade and a long knife blade. Now, I don't think you really need 2 knife blades on a Swiss Army knife when they're both the same sort of blade. So I think losing the small blade and just having the long blade with the combined bottle and can opener and losing another layer will make this a much thinner tool. But I thought, well, if I'm doing that, I could go one step further. Something I've always wanted on this is a wood saw. So I thought, well, I could actually replace one of these layers with the wood saw layer, and then I would have something that's combined Cyber Tool with a wood saw, some bit drivers, the pliers, the scissors and so on. So let's get started. So to carry on this story about the functionality in the plus scales on the Swiss Army knife, Just got some scales here just to show you. These are brand new scales from another penknife, and you can see that there's a little slot here for the tweezers, but there's some space here and there's space along here. So I thought, wouldn't it be quite a nice idea if I modified this to add some additional tools into this space? And I was thinking along the lines of having a fire steel like this one that could fit in here, and then using the space here for a micro SD card. This is a cyber tool at the end of the day, so having a micro SD card with some computer programs that are useful for fixing computers and so on might be quite a nice idea. Now you can buy little fire steels that fit in place of the little screwdriver in the corkscrew, and you can also buy one that replaces the toothpick. If you're interested in those, then they're called the Firefly and the Fire Ant. So it's worth having a look at those. Whilst they're not particularly expensive, when you add the import duties and the postage on, they do become more expensive than the penknife. You know, you'll end up spending 20 or 30 pounds. I bought this for a couple of pounds from a UK supplier. If I can find the UK supplier, I'll leave a link in the video. And this is a little, probably 2mm wide fire steel, so it's much more substantial than the one that replaces the toothpick, and it's a lot longer than the one that fits inside the corkscrew. And I quite like this screwdriver. I don't really want to lose this, so I'm going to use one of these. So I went about trying to design this side of the scale in a CAD program and then 3D print it out, and I had to try a few times to get it to work. Now, the first thing I found that using red PLA, it comes out a sort of pale red, almost a pinkish colour. It's not very good. But I did also find that if you polished these up, which I've done with this one, they do actually come up very, very smooth. Although you can see some imperfections, you can't feel these imperfections. They're actually in the plastic, just slight changes in the colour and so on. So I thought I would try printing one in a PLA that has a bit of a sheen to it, because I thought it would look a bit nicer. And this is the inside of that scale, and you can see the slot here for the fire steel and the slot here for the micro SD card. So I should get a micro SD card so that you can see that. So most of you would have seen my little everyday carry wallet. It's a very slim wallet. One of the things it has in it is a little drawer, and in that drawer I have a little USB plug, and in it there is a micro SD card. So that fits in here like this. Hopefully you can see that. So that works quite well. Now I should say that I started this project probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I got a bit bored of it, and it's sat on the shelf for many years, which is why some of these bits have been made and I can't show you them actually being made. I will leave a link to this particular scale that I designed, which is on Thingiverse, and it will be in the comments or in the video description. Now I quite liked this PLA, the colour of it, but you can probably see there are lots of imperfections. Now it's not actually in the surface, these imperfections. The surface is completely smooth and shiny because I've polished it to 12,000 grit, but you can see that there are imperfections, so it doesn't look great. One of the things that I did, you need to be able to pull this fire steel out of here, and therefore you need a little end on it, the sort of ends that you have on the other tools. So you can see there's a little end on that, and on this, and on the tweezers I have this little end there. So I need to make one of those for this fire steel, and you can imagine trying to add a little end that's the right shape to a fire steel and it hold is quite a difficult task. Now the way I approached it, I'll show you the one that I made in a second. The way I approached it is I carefully filed down part of this fire steel to give me a bit of surface and make it a little bit thinner. I then drilled a hole in a little piece of wood that was the same diameter as the fire steel. I then drilled a wider hole in that piece of wood, but not all the way through, so that I could then push this fire steel into the hole, and I'd be left with a gap around the fire steel, which I then filled with epoxy resin. I then removed that mould that I'd made, and then just using a file and some sandpaper, I was able to make this little end here. It needs repainting. I painted it red. and that has never come off. So that's stuck fast, which is really nice. So that when this goes into here, it sits there nicely, yet it is very easy to pull out, because it's like the other tools, they're just slightly proud by about 0.5 millimetre, and it's just enough for you to pull the thing out. So that makes it look really professional and like it's supposed to be there. So I decided to come back to this project after a number of years, and I bought some new PLA, and since I last printed this, I've also changed the bed on my 3D printer. My 3D printer now has this nice textured surface on it. So I'm thinking I might well keep this as this textured surface. I'm also going to try just sanding it down and seeing if that looks nicer. You can see on the edges the colour of it, quite a nice purple. It's quite shiny, but it's quite a nice textured surface. So on one of these I'm going to polish it up just to see what it looks like. If I don't like it, I'll print it again. If I do like it, then I've also printed the other scale. Now here's where the story changes again, and why I've come back to this project, because I was watching Felix Imler's channel. Now he does a channel all about Swiss Army knives and what you can do with them and how you can modify them and so on. And he showed how you could actually add an LED light to your Swiss Army knife scales. Now he was modifying existing scales, and he's got a mod that fits on this side of the Swiss Army knife, in here somewhere, or it might be in here, and then one that also fits on the other side in this area here. Now he's done that mod just using a chisel and sandpaper and so on, and I thought, well, I could redesign this piece in a CAD program and print it out. Well, before I did that, I had a quick look online, and I found that someone had already done it, and they've fully credited Felix's idea. So that's where the battery goes, and this here is where the LED goes. So my plan is to add the torch into this section here. It still holds the pen, it still holds the toothpick, but I'll also have a torch. So in my scales, I will have a pen, a toothpick, a torch, a fire steel, a tweezers, and a micro SD card, plus pin and the micro screwdriver. I've seen another mod, which I may well do part of this video, which adds some Tinder to the corkscrew, and you can combine it with this micro screwdriver. So I'll also have Tinder for the fire steel. And just to show you, the fire steel does actually work. Now this is just a fun project. I don't really have any expectation of ever needing a fire steel in London, or really having any need for a tiny torch, but they're fun things to do, and that's why I'm doing them. Now to take these scales off, some people say you should dunk the Swiss Army knife in some very hot water for a few minutes just to soften the plastic, because I'm not too worried about this because they're all scratched up and I've got spares anyway. I'm just going to use a Swiss Army knife to prise them off like that, and I should do the same on this side. Just put the knife in and twist. If you look very carefully at this scale, putting them in the boiling water prevents this. I don't know if you can see this little thread of plastic that's come off as I've pulled the scale off. Now this will probably go back, snap back on okay, but do it multiple times and this is ultimately damaging it every time. So it's just something to be aware of. If you want them to snap on, then it's an idea to warm them up so you soften this material around the little rivets that they snap onto. But as I say, these are old, I'm not too worried about them. Now the Swiss Army knife is quite a feat of engineering, really. It's held together with 4 little rods. There's these 3 rods here which have these little brass clips on them, and then there's a little rod here in the middle which holds all of the springs and the tools at the back in place, and all those rods go all the way through the knife. The way to dismantle them, and they are all under slight spring tension, so you have to be a little bit careful, is to just take a drill that's the same width as the rod to these and just partially drill them out, and then these little rings will pop off. And the way you put them back is you push the rings on and then you hammer down to splay out the brass rod in exactly the same way as you would a rivet. Obviously, if you're doing that to an existing Swiss Army knife, then you're going to need to replace the pins because the pins won't be long enough because you would have drilled them out. My plan here is to make the whole thing a little bit narrower, so I'm hoping I can get away with reusing the existing rods because I'm going to have to shorten them anyway. Just to recap what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove this layer with the knives in. I'm going to remove this layer with the torch and the magnifying glass in, and I'm going to remove this layer with the dedicated can opener and corkscrew in. I'm then going to add a layer which has the combination can opener and bottle opener and a long knife, and I'm going to add a layer that has a saw and a reamer. So the whole thing will be thinner by the thickness of the torch, which you can see is a reasonable chunk of the Swiss Army knife. It's probably 4 or 5 millimeters in thickness that we're going to remove whilst adding in those extra tools. So I will tell you, I am a little bit nervous about doing this. I have taken apart a couple of Swiss Army knives in the past as part of this project early on so that I could get the extra tools that I needed for this project. But I am very nervous about actually taking this apart and knowing if I can actually successfully put it all back together again. It is playing on my mind a little bit, but I guess there's no time like the present, and I have procrastinated on this for 5 years, so I think now's the time to just give it a go. The layer that has the saw on it, I have had to modify the spring because the saw layer doesn't normally have a tool on the back of it, and when I remove the bottle opener and the can opener I will lose the reamer. I don't want to lose the reamer, so I found a spring that fits and it seems to work okay with the saw. I just had to modify this side of the spring so that the saw would fit correctly when it's closed, and then the reamer fits in here. It's all a bit loose at the moment, but I have tried it when it's all tight and it does seem to work. So I'll have the saw and the reamer all on the same layer. I've also been playing about with this layer that has the knife and the combined bottle opener stroke can opener. It also has the wire stripper and a flat bladed screwdriver just to check all that works, and this seems to work fine. It all goes together nicely. I will replace the scissors on this one with these scissors only because these scissors are brand new and they've got a new spring, and the spring on the scissors on this one are broken. So these layers all fit together and this is how these layers are going to go. So I've done a little bit of preparation. I just now need to take this thing apart. I've added some cork to my machine vice jaws so that I don't damage the penknife when I drill out these rivets. I'm using a drill bit the same thickness as the brass rods that the rivets go on. So one of these little rings I damaged cutting it off, but the other two are fine. But I've got some spares from the donor penknife, so it's not too big a problem. I filed the pins flat to get rid of the burr and then just file off the little rivet that holds the corkscrew in. So I now need to carefully disassemble the penknife. It needs a little bit more filing on that one. So here you can see how the first layer is constructed. You've got your corkscrew and its pivot. You have this spring here which is used for all three of the tools. So you've got the knife here, the small knife and the corkscrew. They all push against this spring, so it's all under tension. Now I've already got that in this setup here, which I'm going to use because this one's not so good a condition as these. So I have these first two layers. I need to change these pins to the pins that are in this because these are longer. But these first layers with the knife and the combination bottle opener and can opener are ready, and with the corkscrew there. So this will be my first two layers, albeit with different pins. So all the things on here I can prise off and discard. So nothing on this layer I need. Although I've noticed I hadn't included this piece on my replacement layer. I will need to use this. Let's get this knife off first. It looks like this is the wrong spring, because the scissors has this spring with this hook. I want to keep the hook, I want to keep the scissors, so I'm going to just recover all of these pieces. I'm going to reuse these scissors. These remaining layers I'm not using, but I still need to take it apart because I want to use this back piece and the pins. Some of these pieces need a little clean before I put them back together. So this has got a lot of old crud in it. I'm just going to give it a bit of a tidy up. So this is a new layer that I didn't have before, which is going to be, it goes like that. It's going to be the saw and the awl. Right, I fitted this. I originally had the saw on the wrong side. Now I've got the saw on the right side. It all fits nicely together. I now need to add a liner and then the next layer. So this is the liner. Do a bit of a clean. Give that a clean. The tricky part is just getting all the springs tensioned while you're putting the piece in. Now that the piece is in, it should stay there okay. Now for the second layer, the bit driver. I'm going to have to refer to my diagram to work out where these go. So I feel they should be around here like that. That's not going to work. Not going to work because it is like that. Remember that they were along the back of the unit, so perhaps this needs to go around this way. That's better. That's making a lot more sense already. And these go on there like that. Tensioned in there like that. Add the layer. That spring's not in the right place. I just need to lift this up. Is that layer in place? Now I've got the pliers. Pliers in place. I need another liner. I think the liners, because they're thin, and because all of them need to line up together, because the pins are slightly mangled from taking everything off. They seem to be the hardest things to go back on. Put together nicely. Now got what I think is the last layer. It goes there, so I guess it's got to go that way, isn't it? Piece must go in there like that. And got a nice, goes in there like that. That goes in there like that. And this piece, here it goes like that. And that must go like that. And then Okay. Something's not right with this layer. So I just need to look at this. So this piece here isn't laying flat, so I just need to work out why that is. I think it just needs to go behind a spring. There we go. I think that's right. Ah, I see what's going on. These scales are slightly different to these ones. No, it's not the right one. Okay. So I was wondering why these were slightly different. This has got a little indentation in it. And it's got an indentation in it because it doesn't have this, and it's to compensate for this little ring. So I can't use this one, this last liner. I need to use the original. I was using this one because I thought it was in better condition. Let me just show you the difference between these two. So, see these scales, this bit here is raised, it's just punched into it on the back, and that's to compensate for it not having the lanyard ring. So I can't use that one, but I can use this one. That should make it work perfectly. That works. So fun fact, these two pins here are slightly smaller at 2.2mm diameter than these pins here, which are 2.5. So these rings that look the same actually aren't. The ones for these are actually slightly larger. I'll zoom on this so that you can see that these rings are slightly conical on the inside, only on one side, and they've got a slight lip as well on that same edge that they're conical. So what I have to do is file or cut these to the right length and then hammer them back down to make them rivets again. This one here, which doesn't have a ring, it just has to be cut and then hammered down to make it a rivet. I've decided to file these rather than cut them because I think I can be a little bit more accurate with the height. I then hammer it down using a punch. So I file them down one at a time, using the punch after each one so that the penknife is secure. I can now work on the scales and see if I prefer glossy or textured finish. So I start by sanding at 400 grit. I then go up the grits, starting at 220, then 400. I then switch to 2400, 3200, 3600, 4000, 6000, 8000, finishing up on 12,000. And then finally I use some mildly abrasive plastic polish to finish the job. So hopefully here you can see the shine that I've been able to achieve. It is completely flat, and those marks that you can see are actually from the manufacturing process, but they're underneath the smooth surface. They're not actually on the surface. It's as smooth as any Swiss Army knife scale would be, but it does have this sort of grain effect to it. So which scales do you prefer? The shiny one or the textured finish one? Let me know in the comments. I think on balance I prefer the shiny one, mainly because the transition from the sides to the textured surface looks a little bit artificial. Now I might just try smoothing that off and seeing what it then looks like, but I suspect I'm just going to sand them down like I did with the other scale to make them shiny. So this idea is genius. I have here a little ultra bright LED and it needs about 3 volts to run, but these little batteries, they're CR1220 batteries. And when you connect them like that, they don't need a resistor, but you do get pretty bright light. To make the switch, we use a little bit of insulation tape. We cover half the battery like so, and then trim it up to get the friction just right. Apparently you can just move this piece of insulation tape backwards and forwards until you get it how you like it. I've just got to remember which way round this went. It was that way round. So that now fits there like that. This LED, incidentally, I've had to file it slightly on the edges just to make it as small as possible. And the battery fits in the battery compartment, LED fits in the LED compartment. I shall glue that in, but the idea is you then press down on the scale and it turns the light on. So I'm just going to mark where to cut these wires because I don't need them to be that long. I'm just going to hold the LED in place with a drop of super glue. That should be all it needs. Now the last thing I'm going to do to this is the LED protrudes a little bit. Now I can't take it right down to the profile of the scale without potentially damaging the LED, but I can remove most of what's protruding with a file, which is what I'm now going to do. I just need to be careful to not actually break into the contacts on the LED, the working pieces. Now I have these little fire starters, actually hemp string that are coated in, I think it's just wax, and you unwind it basically and fray the ends and it catches fire very quickly and it burns for quite a time. Quite nice for starting fires. I've wrapped this one around the corkscrew and that works quite nicely. It's reasonably mouldable so you can leave it in there, and then there's still room for the little eyeglasses screwdriver. To keep it tidy, thinking I'll put a piece of this heat shrink over it, and I'll then warm the heat shrink up so it moulds it to the shape, and I should just be able to unscrew the heat sink. If I look at the length of this that I need and cut it appropriately, I can now try shrinking that. So this works out quite well. I can take the screwdriver out when I want to use a screwdriver. I can take the whole thing out if I want to use the whole thing. It's quite easy to do. And it closes nicely. So that about wraps up this video. I'm really pleased with how this came out. I think the scales that are nice and shiny with this lovely bluish purple PLA have worked really well. The mods to the scales have worked really well, including the light, which, where's the light, which is here. It works really well. I don't know if you can see that, it's not the brightest light in the world, but getting a light inside the scales is quite a feat, I think. So thanks to Felix for developing that idea. Overall, I've got the tools that I wanted in a Swiss Army knife. You can't buy this Swiss Army knife with these tools, and I have achieved my goal of making it thinner than it was. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. If you've got any questions about this or any of my other videos, then please leave them in the comments below. If you like this video and you got this far, please leave a thumbs up. It makes a massive difference. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.